Hello, welcome to Chat UTD. I'm going to talk about something that I think we're going to find ourselves talking about a lot this season, and that's the future of the manager. When Ineos looked for other managers after the FA Cup final, and I think probably before that as well, they undermined the authority of Ten Hag, and even though he stayed and signed a bolt-on extension, which was already there, I don't think any of us are really convinced that he's the person that Ineos want. Even before the season started, we all speculated, and a lot of people speculated outside of United, that the presence of Van Nistelrooy is interesting. That if United hit a bit of a difficult spell, the pressure's going to ramp up straight away. And of course, we've only played 3 games, so I don't see the club sacking a manager after 3 games or anytime soon. But I think between now and the October window is a massive period for Ten Hag. And I want to just talk about whether he may or may not get sacked, candidates that could replace him, and whether that should or shouldn't happen, I suppose. First of all, regardless of whether I think he should go or not, I don't think he'll be the manager of United next season. And if you push me, I don't think he'll be the manager of United after Christmas, because I don't think anything's going to change as much as it needs to for that to happen. Ineos clearly don't want him. Going and interviewing other managers, you could call it a thorough process, you can dress it up as you want. It doesn't inspire confidence in the current manager when you've done that. He isn't their person, and he's on dodgy ground, because you can keep pointing to 2 trophies, but we finished 8th last season and lost 14 games and scored a paltry amount of goals and conceded far too many. So cups are one thing, that's great, but as Roy Keane said, you can be a cup team for a bit in the lead up to becoming a better team, but the league is your bread and butter and where you're judged whether you like it or not. And yeah, he's not on steady ground, I wouldn't say, as it stands. There are factors behind that, I've always said, and will continue to I suppose have sympathy for the fact that when he first came in, people have got very, very short memories. United's season under Solskjaer and Ranić was wretched. It was horrible. And at that point, so many United players in that squad had had numerous chances to prove that they could do it over a consistent period, and they hadn't been able to do that. The best they could manage was the odd season, really, where they could put something together. Solskjaer, in fairness, has probably been the most consistent United manager in terms of getting us into Champions League in successive seasons. But still, when push came to shove, when we were in the final stages of competitions, we could never get over the line. The mentality was never strong enough. The consistency was never there. And there were so many players that I felt had reached the end of their time at United. And yet, not one of the big hitters went. So Ten Hag inherited the squad from the previous season that had been so wretched under Solskjaer and Ranić. And a revolution was needed, and it didn't happen. So many of them are still there now, which I'll come to in a minute. But it's the players that didn't go that was a problem. United have given Ten Hag players, and in terms of the money that's been spent and the type of players that he would want. But nonetheless, there's still so many players that needed to have left so long ago. And I do have sympathy for him in that respect. He's got the Glazers as his owners. That is a massive mitigating factor. The club is a complete and utter shit show, and people can talk about proper structure. There is no proper structure. There is now, but he hasn't benefited from a proper structure. He hasn't benefited from a proper structure this summer, because the people that are going to be part of that better structure have only literally just come through the door. So it's not a settled proper structure. There's legacy damage, and that hangover from the Glazers is still very much in operation right now. We were hamstrung this summer again because of that. So there are factors. But that's United. And those are the circumstances any manager is going to have to work in right now. And obviously we can't go backwards, but over the last couple of years, whoever was in charge would have to live within those circumstances. So my question would be, could someone else have done a better job? Or is he pushing the envelope and pushing as far as he can push and getting the absolute 100% maximum out of what he's got? And is he doing the best possible job, even despite those limiting circumstances? And for me, the answer would be no. I can forgive 6th or 5th. It's a poor season for Man United standards, but I could point to those mitigating circumstances. 8th is inexplicable. Injuries, whatever. I don't care about injuries. You've got a squad, you've got to get the best out of it. If you can't get the best out of it, bring some young players in. I'm going to come to his stubbornness and his over-reliance on players who are unreliable in a minute. But he's been very, very stubborn. He's been very loyal to players who don't deserve it. And in that respect, I don't have that much sympathy for him. So 8th isn't good enough. So despite all of those mitigating circumstances, he's not been good enough to live with those circumstances. Is there a manager out there, particularly now that there is some structure being put in place, is there a manager out there now that can come in and get more out of the players that are here right now? Is there someone right next to him in the dugout that could do that? Let's look at why he's on a sticky wicket. I've already hinted at some things, but I'm just going to say a few more. Despite the fact that he was left with players that I don't think he probably wanted, and it has made it difficult for him to play exactly the way he wants to play. I was looking at the signings last night that he's had, and Anthony, Martinez, Onana, Matthijs de Ligt, Mazraoui, and Amrabat he's managed all of those players. So he's had 6 players, 2 per window, that he's managed before. That's understandable in his first season when he first came in, because he came into a mess. He came into quite a toxic dressing room, and as I said, the players that needed to leave didn't leave. So I would completely understand then that you want players around you that you trust and that you know. So that summer he got Martinez and Anthony in, who both have done really well for him at Ajax. I get that. Moyes did it with Fellaini, and I think you'll find, I was watching a Brian Clough documentary over the summer. Wherever he went, John Robertson went with him. It's the norm. I get that. But that's your first season. And then you need to build something in your own image and start to get players, not just players that you've managed before, but players that are of the now, players that are coming through. I suppose a bit more like an Ugarte type signing. But he's just continued to get his own players. But the issue is, the longer time goes by, it's a long time since you've managed those players. And those players are older, and they're not the players that you remember, because in some cases that's 4 years ago when you managed them. And out of those players, I know 2 of them have just signed, so you can't judge them. But out of the 4 that I'm talking about, Anthony, Martinez, Onana and Amrabat, who of them has really pulled up trees? Martinez. But he's had 1 year pretty much out injured. None of them are 10 out of 10s. None of them are 9 or 8 out of 10s. And Onana, as I mentioned the other day, that's his goalkeeper. I get it. But as time goes by, I can just see so many flaws in his game. And Anthony is Anthony, and we all have our opinion on him. I do remain in the camp that there's a player there, but the fact that Ten Hag knows him so well makes it even harder to see him just not improve. Week after week after week, doing the same thing over and over again. And it does point to the fact that I wonder about Ten Hag as a coach. I wonder how good a coach he is. You've got a player there that you know really well who keeps doing the same thing wrong over and over again, can't find his best form. You wanted him to come to the club because you know him and you've coached him before. Why are you not getting a tune out of him? Because there is a player in there. Maybe not a world-class player, but a player that can do a lot better than what we've seen so far. And I think a player that wants to do well. So he has had the players he wants. sometimes I think at the detriment of the balance of the squad. Another big factor for me is his inability to react to adverse situations, and when the tide turns in a game, he just seems completely powerless to know what to do to change it. And there's a few examples, but the one that was the nail in the coffin for me, in terms of me thinking he needs to go, was the Coventry semi-final last year, when Mark Robins made a slight tactical tweak and brought on 2 players. I think, to be fair, we brought off Mainu and Garnacho because we thought the game was won, and I get that. But even within that, you don't just bring off 2 players and then your whole team goes to shit, which is what happened. Robins makes 2 tactical subs, and we just didn't know what to do. And Coventry were hurting us time after time after time. And a championship team outmanoeuvred us, outplayed us, the tactics were better, and from a 3-goal deficit should have won the game. That's unacceptable. That's completely unacceptable. If that's a one-off, it's unacceptable. But it's not a one-off. How many times last season were we doing okay in a game, and then the tide started to turn, and again, he just didn't know what to do? Wolves away, we're 3-0 up, we're completely outplaying them. And again, in the second half, inexplicably, they come back into the game. Now, we won it 4-3 with Mainu scoring a worldie at the end. But that's 2 3-goal leads that we've let go, where alarm bells were ringing and he just didn't know what to do. I point again to the Brighton game this season. Their manager, you can say his age is irrelevant, his experience is irrelevant. He's 31 years old, and he looks at the game and he brings 3 substitutes on late in the day, 87th minute. They score in the 95th minute, but for those 8 minutes, that goal was coming. And again, he didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to do to change it. And top managers know. Top managers are proactive and have foresight to almost know what's coming, let alone, of course, they know what to do to react to a situation. Or you have coaches around you maybe that are better than you with that. Ferguson wasn't a master tactician, but he always had coaches around him that would be in his ear, and he knew well enough to listen to them. And on to the coaches. Carragher mentioned this at the weekend. The summer before Brendan Rodgers got sacked, when they'd had a poor season, there was talk of him going, and the club changed the backroom staff. He didn't, I don't think, particularly wanted to, but the club changed the backroom staff. And I remember it might have even been Carragher on Sky that said it at that time when Rodgers was still in charge, that this is normally the prelude to a manager getting sacked. If a club insists you change the staff, the next move is, if it doesn't improve, the manager goes. And Carragher mentioned it again and I remember that, and Carragher mentioned it again on Sunday, and I agree with him. Ineos, or when do we stop calling them Ineos and just start saying United? I don't know. For now, I'm still going to say Ineos. Ineos or their people have, I think, insisted on the new coaching staff, and they've got someone in like Van Nistelrooy, who could have gone to Burnley and been the main man, and I imagine probably had other offers out there as well, who's an absolute next in line interim manager. And so that's one thing. But 2, you've probably gone above the manager's head and given him staff that he hasn't asked for. He was probably quite happy with the staff as it was. And because they didn't sack him, they knew something needed to change. They know something on the coaching front needs to change. They've not sacked him because they haven't had the courage of their convictions to do it after the FA Cup final. And again, I'm sorry to keep quoting him, but Carragher said it, they bottled it. They did bottle it. Because if they've had the courage of the convictions, they'd have gone and got someone else. They didn't want Ten Hag. And you can point to the fact that, there's nobody out there. First of all, that's bollocks. There's hundreds of managers out there. Point to Brighton again. But I don't think he should be our manager, by the way. I'm just saying they always seem to have a successor lined up, and it's not always an obvious name. So do your homework, and there'll be people out there. It's not for me to know who the manager is. I don't run Man United. It's up to them. They have 4 months, and they couldn't come up with anybody. But if we'd have lost the cup final, they'd have got sacked. So we'd have found a manager then, wouldn't we? So they haven't had the courage of the convictions to do it. So they've changed the coaching staff around him, and they've very cleverly put a United legend, who's a pretty high-profile character and has very recently been a manager and can still be a manager, as his number 2. With another manager from Go Ahead Eagles as another coach, who I then think would be Ruud's number 2 as an interim. It's set up. The contingency plan is there, and you could say, well, at least they've got a contingency plan. I'm going to come back to my worries about that in a minute if that did happen. The other glaringly obvious problem with Ten Hag is his blind spots with certain players, which every manager has to some degree or other. But and I don't know if his hands are tied with Rashford. I suspect they are, but we don't know that for sure. He keeps picking him. He doesn't bring him off. And as it stands right now, with the knowledge we have, other than speculation, that's on him, and he keeps picking him. His lack of faith in Ahmad is maybe that will come to fruition at some point, where we all think, oh, right, that's why Ten Hag didn't back Ahmad, because perhaps he'll get a run of games and we'll start to see his flaws. But right now, that looks baffling. Anana, he doesn't even rotate him in Europe or in the cup games. He plays him. He's not doing particularly well when he does play, and we've got an international goalkeeper as a number 2 that just sits there. Yeah, his loyalty to certain players and his insistence on picking and actually his lack of faith in other players, which I think would really help us. Again, we could say that's opinion, but that for me is baffling and points against him. And also, I think you see someone's character when they're under pressure, and there's certain people who can cope with it, and there's certain people that can't. The vast majority can't, and he looks like he can't. He doesn't come out with succinct points. He doesn't come out and articulate things in a way which inspires confidence, because there are people in the game who, if they are struggling, can talk a good game, can come out and explain things, can Postecoglou, if that's the right way of saying it, last season was struggling at the end of last season, but you listen to him, he's quite captivating. I don't want him managing United, but I'm just saying that when it hit a sticky patch with Tottenham and you listen to him, you get the impression he could sit there all day having a bit of a chat about it. And you see Ten Hag, and he's extremely defensive, which I understand. He's in a difficult position, but he gives hollow comments like, judges at the end of the season. Well, no, that's not the way football works, Eric. You've just lost 3-0 to Liverpool, and whether you like it or not, you're going to be judged on that and the previous 2 games and what people can see in front of them, because you haven't got that credit in the bank anymore. Last season you did. You haven't. You haven't now. Stop talking about 2 trophies. We finished 8th and lost 14 games, so that credit's gone. You need to start putting a team out there that can produce. And as I said, there's lots of mitigating circumstances as to why maybe that's not happening. It's not about us winning leagues and stuff like that. No manager would come in and win the league with this team. But it's about progress, and are we making enough under that manager? So finally then, what do we do? It's really tricky, because EtH are in their first full season in charge of the football side of United, and we want to see progress. We want to see the formulation of a playing style. And sacking a manager can sometimes have a really big positive impact if you have the right person that comes in. But it can also just write your season off, as we've seen before. It depends what you do. Does Ruud van Nistelrooy take over and oversee season 1 of ETH's project, for want of a better expression, with progression towards something? Because my understanding is that this new structure overrides and supersedes any manager that comes in. So we should still, essentially in that first season, we should still see progress, whoever the manager is, because of the people that are above the manager. You sack a manager, I think you risk that, especially if the person you replace him with is an interim. You might get a bounce, but is that bounce a movement towards consistent performance that we would want to see? Maybe they think Van Nistelrooy can oversee that, and that's why they've insisted on it being him that's one of the coaches. I don't know. But he's coaching now, isn't he? And not seeing massive improvements. Or I'll play devil's advocate. Do we have the pull to go and take someone out of a job? Do we go back for Kieran McKenna, for example? Hell of a job to come into partway through a season when you've got no experience. But he was a name, of course, that was being mentioned around the FA Cup final at that time. That United were keen on him. All of the other names that would be free are the same ones that were free that they didn't want previously. Tuchel, please, I don't want him. Southgate is now free, but that's gone very quiet, thankfully. Well, I wouldn't rule it out, but I mean that'd be horrific. But he's free now. But Pochettino was the other one that was being mentioned, who I think is going to take the USA job. Who else? I don't know. But so the market's narrowed even further than it. Sorry, the market is narrower now than it was when they were looking for a manager in May and June. So Van Nistelrooy looks a shoe-in if they were to do it. I think they will do it. I think they'll pull the plug. I think they're almost looking for an excuse to pull the plug. But I believe they should have had the courage of their convictions and gone and got someone in the summer, because there's hundreds of managers out there, like I said. So I don't know. I don't know what you do for the best. They've actually repeated a mistake that has been made a few times in recent years by United. Mourinho, after his second season, should have left because the club clearly had stopped backing him. In the summer between his second and third season, he asked for specific players and he didn't get them. And then 3 or 4 months later, he was sacked. After the Europa League final that Ollie got us to and we finished second, it was clear to me that the Solskjaer thing had run its course. Done a fantastic job, but it was time to move on to someone who could take us to that next level. The club didn't think that. They bought Ronaldo over his head. I think they probably bought Sancho over his head. And he was sacked within 3 or 4 months. Ten Hag, they clearly didn't want him. He wins the FA Cup final. They use the excuse that they've exhausted every avenue and there's nothing else out there. They keep him. He ain't going to last the season. And they haven't given him the revolution that was needed. But there's a part of me which thinks the revolution really needs to happen with another manager, because what's the word? He's fatigued. Ten Hag. United wears you out. The scrutiny, the crap that surrounds the club, the toxicity around certain elements of it. It's a lot to deal with, and he's had 2 years of it. I think it needs a fresh face and somebody who's Ineos's man to take that first step for them. But this season becomes another holding season, redundant season. They should have done it in May, regardless of the FA Cup final. And he goes out in a blaze of glory, and us wondering what would have happened next. You always leave with the crowd wanting more. As it stands right now, even his staunchest supporters in 2 or 3 months' time will probably go, yeah, we probably needs to go. It's just inevitable. So, again, what you do next is really important. We need to have a plan in place in the background that says whoever comes in next oversees a drastic improvement. But why are we writing off the first few months of our season with someone that we don't have any faith in? Weird. And not inspiring, again, from Ineos. He could surprise everybody and things could light up in the next few weeks and months. I just don't think that'll happen. So, in summary, I think he will get sacked. I think that's probably the right decision, but I think it should have been made earlier, because then this season would be a full season under a new manager where we're aiming towards something that is truly an Ineos thing. Whereas right now we've got 1 foot in the past and 1 foot in the future and 1 foot in the present, and it's all just a bit of a mess. Glazers out.